The boy came out of the pines on his hands and knees, blood running down into the heel of his only boot, and the first thing the mountain rancher said was, "Climb on my horse." The child did not ask who he was. He looked once over his shoulder, toward the dark timber above the switchback trail, and there was such plain animal terror in his face that Danner Cole felt it in his own teeth. The boy's fingers were wrapped around a dented tin box the size of a biscuit pan. He held it tighter than he held himself together. "They're close," he whispered. Danner swung down from the saddle. The wind coming off the ridge smelled of old snow and split pine. Somewhere higher up, loose shale clicked under more than one set of hooves. "Then climb now," Danner said. "Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Porch, kitchen, truck cab, little town, big city, near or far, we always like knowing who's riding with us." The boy tried to stand, failed, and made no sound when his leg gave way. That told Danner more than crying would have. Children who had been allowed softness cried. Children who had learned better saved their breath. Danner slid one arm behind the boy's back, lifted him light as kindling, and settled him in front of the saddle. Blood had soaked through the seat of his trousers. Not a scrape, then. A real wound. "What's your name?" The boy swallowed. "Toby." Danner mounted behind him and turned the mare off the road and into the timber, up a path no wagon could find and most horses refused on first asking. The mare did not refuse. Danner's hand stayed easy on the reins, and when Toby stiffened at every branch crack and bird startle, Danner kept his voice low. "You're safe till somebody gets past me." Toby did not answer that either. He only pressed the tin box harder against his ribs and watched the woods with the face of someone who had already learned what promises were worth. The line shack sat in a fold of rock above the creek, half hidden by fir and deadfall, built years back for calving season storms. Danner got Toby inside, barred the door, and knelt in the smell of old cedar smoke and saddle soap. When he cut the trouser leg away, the wound showed itself. A knife, shallow but ugly, drawn across the calf. There was another gash along Toby's side where the shirt had dried black. Danner poured whiskey over the cuts. Toby went white clear to the lips, but never cried out. His hand cramped so hard around the tin box that Danner thought the metal might bend. "Who did it?" Toby stared at the floorboards. "Mr. Pike's man first. Then the rocks helped." Danner knew the name. Vernon Pike owned the sawmill below Mercy Gap, the general store, half the mortgages in the valley, and enough of the sheriff's courage to make the rest useless. Men spoke his name softly when they had to say it at all. "What did you take?" Danner asked. Toby looked up so fast the answer was plain before he spoke. "Something he wants back." Danner brought water to a boil, tore an old clean shirt for bandages, and worked in silence. He had always been better with hurt animals and hurt children than with grown folk. They did not expect talk from you. They only expected your hands to do what needed doing. Once the worst of the blood was cleaned away, he noticed older marks on the boy, thin white scars over both shoulders. A burn the size of a coin near one wrist. Bruises going yellow beneath fresh ones. Toby caught him looking and pulled the shirt closed with sudden shame, as if the wrong in the room belonged to him. Danner felt something old and hard shift under his breastbone. "How old are you?" 11. "Nearly 12. Any kin?" Toby gave the tiniest shake of his head. "Not that counts anymore." Outside, a horse blew through its nose. Danner stood so quickly the chair legs scraped. He crossed to the back slit window and looked down through the trees. 3 riders on the lower trail. One in a pale hat. One with a rifle across his lap. They stopped where the blood had first marked the stones. Toby had gone still behind him. "That one on the gray. He's Mr. Pike's foreman." Danner took down the carbine hanging over the hearth. He checked the chamber, then glanced at the tin box. "You can read?" Toby blinked, surprised by the question. "Yes." "What's in it?" The boy hesitated. Then, very carefully, he set the box on his knees and opened it. Inside lay folded papers, a small leather ledger, and a ribbon-wrapped packet of letters so worn at the corners they had been hidden a long time. Danner saw columns of names, figures, dates. Another page held 6 boys' names written in a tighter hand, with one line beside each. Fever, Mule Kick, Run Off, Buried South Field. Eli Renner wasn't Fever, Toby said. His voice had gone flat in the way frightened people sometimes go when fear turns to something colder. He got hit with the loading hook. He lived till evening. Mrs. Coyle said to write fever because nobody asks after orphan boys. Danner looked back at the riders below. The pale hat had started dismounting to study the ground. If Pike wanted a bleeding child that badly, there would be no law in this valley willing to stand in the way of it. He shut the box. Can you ride if I tie you on? Toby's chin lifted. I can. They left by the rear path, leading the mare over stone where hooves made less confession. Danner took Toby down through a stand of spruce and across the creek twice to spoil the trail. By dusk they reached the home ranch. A narrow valley spread beneath the mountain like a hand finally opened. Smoke rose from Danner's cabin chimney. His bay gelding was in the side paddock. Everything looked ordinary. Then he saw the man sitting on his porch. Vernon Pike rose as they came through the gate. He was dressed too fine for mountain dust, dark coat still brushed clean, boots polished, gloves tucked in one hand. He wore power the way some men wore cologne, casually, as if it improved the air around him. Sheriff Bell stood by the hitch rail with his one watering eye and his hat pushed too far back on his head. Two more men waited near the barn. Pike smiled at the sight of Toby. There you are. Danner swung down, but did not help the boy off. Evening. Mr. Cole. Pike's gaze moved over the bandaged leg, the tin box, the rifle. County property wandered off from St. Agnes home this morning. Took papers that don't belong to him. I'm here to save everybody trouble. Toby shrank against the saddle. Danner kept one hand on the reins. Funny sort of property. Bleeds like a child. Something flickered behind Pike's smile and was gone. He is under county care. You, unfortunately, are under note to my bank. 3 missed payments in 2 years. I have been patient because your late wife was a gentle woman and because mountain men often mistake stubbornness for solvency. Sheriff Bell cleared his throat and looked at everything but Toby. Pike stepped closer, voice still smooth. Hand over the boy in the box, and I forget the arrears. Keep them, and come Monday, I take this ranch, your stock, and the roof over your head. I may also mention to the court that you abducted a ward of the county. That tends to sound ugly when written down. The mountain air had gone bitter with evening cold. Danner could feel Toby trembling through the saddle leather. He had spent 3 winters and 2 bad springs holding this place together with wire, prayer, and the habit of going without. He had buried a wife on the slope above the creek and a little boy beside her. He had thought loss had already taken everything it meant to take. Then Toby's hand, small and blood-warm, caught in the back of his coat, and Danner knew the shape of the choice before him. I'll have an answer by morning, he said. Pike studied him, amused the way men get when they believe the board is already theirs. No, you have it now. Men tell themselves there's always one more night to be decent in. There rarely is. Danner met his eyes. Then you've got your answer now, too. The smile left Pike's face like a door quietly shutting. Morning, he said, and turned for his horse. That was the hour the world stopped being Danner Cole's private grief and became a fight somebody else's child might die in. He carried Toby into the cabin and sent his ranch hands old bell rope jangling for the one person in Mercy Gap who still came when folks were bleeding before anybody had figured out how to pay. Eliza Wynn arrived after dark in her thick wool coat, hair braided back, doctor's satchel in one hand and a lantern in the other. She had the kind of face sorrow had pared down to its truest lines. Not hard, just exact. She took one look at Toby on the table and put her satchel down. What did you bring me, Danner? Trouble. I can see that. I meant the child. Toby, the boy said. Her voice changed at once. Softer, but never pitying. All right, Toby. I'm Eliza. If you bite, do me the courtesy of warning me first. For the first time that day, the boy almost smiled. While she stitched the side wound, Danner fed the stove and told her enough. Not all of it. Some truths sounded larger spoken after dark, but enough for her to understand who sat on his porch and what he wanted. Eliza's hands never faltered. Pike's boys have been hauling more children up to the cut camps this year. Folks know. They say they don't know, but they do. Why hasn't anyone said it plain? She tied off a stitch with her neat, clever fingers. Because he owns the store credit, the winter coal, the sheriff, and half the valley's debt. And because most people can bear a wrong better than they can bear the cost of fighting it. Toby's eyes stayed on the ceiling. Eli said grown folks always know. They just wait to find out if it's their turn. Silence sat in the cabin after that. Fire popped. Wind pressed once at the shutters. Danner looked at Eliza and saw that she had gone pale around the mouth. When Toby finally slept, she washed her hands in the basin and stood at the window. You cannot keep him here. No, no. You can hide a calf. Not a child. Pike is hunting with papers behind him. She turned. Take him over the ridge to Carson Hollow. The mission there might cover him till I can write the circuit judge. That gives Pike half a day to find him on the road. It gives you a chance to keep your land. There it was. Not cruel, merely true. Danner braced both palms on the table. The wood smelled faintly of coffee and carbolic and blood. My land won't do me much good if I use it to hand over a boy. Eliza's eyes flashed. And dead men protect no one. He said nothing. She pressed her lips together, then looked toward the bed where Toby slept with one fist still resting on the tin box. Something in her face shifted then, old hurt answering fresh hurt. 3 winters ago, she said quietly, my daughter took sick so fast I could feel the heat through the blankets. I sent for the doctor. Pike had hired him out to the logging camp. He came the next morning, an hour too late. She stared at the fire as if it had spoken first. So don't mistake fear for indifference in me. I know exactly what men like Vernon Pike cost. Danner had no answer big enough for that. She gathered her satchel. At the door she paused. You asked once, years ago, what keeps a person decent after the world stops rewarding it? Her hand tightened on the latch. I still don't know. But if you mean to do this, do it all the way. By morning the valley knew. Mrs. Greer at the store wiped the same spot on her counter until the rag went dry and told anyone buying flour that Danner Cole had stolen a county ward clean out from under the sheriff. Bell himself rode by at noon with a paper in his pocket and uncertainty leaking from his bad eye. Old Hob, who sharpened plow teeth, left a sack of oats by Danner's gate without knocking. 2 children on the schoolhouse steps stared as if Toby might vanish if they blinked. And Toby, who had spent his life making himself smaller than rooms required, made the bed, washed his cup, stacked wood, and asked permission before he breathed. It angered Danner more than the wound had. Near noon he found the boy behind the barn trying to saddle the smallest pony with hands that shook. Where are you going? Toby did not turn. Away. Why? So you can say I ran. Danner took in the set jaw, the over-careful buckles, the terrible effort it cost him not to look hopeful. Who told you to think that way? Nobody had to. Danner stepped closer and finished the cinch himself. Listen to me. Easy road here is I hand you over, keep the ranch, and tell myself there wasn't anything one man could do. That road is open as daylight. Toby stared at the dirt. The hard road, Danner went on, is I stand where I ought to be, stood the first minute and let the rest come. A roof means nothing if the first child under it ain't safe. Toby's mouth twitched like he did not trust it to stay steady. You don't even know me. Maybe not. Danner rested a hand on the pony's neck. But I know what's chasing you. If you were in his place, with land on one side and that wounded boy on the other, what would you have chosen? Tell me in the comments, because the hardest choices in life are rarely the loud ones. Eliza arrived that afternoon with a folded packet under her arm and purpose in her stride. I have burial notices, she said before she was all the way through the door. 3 boys from St. Agnes over 10 months. Every one signed by Pike's clerk. Every cause too tidy by half. I kept copies because something in me wouldn't let it lie. She spread the papers beside Toby's ledger. Her fingertip tapped the names. Look, Eli Renner, Joseph Vale, Micah Stone. Toby leaned forward. Micah had a crushed chest. Log chain snapped. Danner read the figures in the ledger. Feed, boots, salt pork, charges docked from county allotment, names of boys transferred to the high camp, payments to Bell, payments to Coyle, payments entered under equipment loss after death. Pike had not merely hidden children. He had turned them into arithmetic. We take this to Judge Harrow, Eliza said. He comes through the depot tomorrow for the water dispute. Bell's warrant arrived before the sentence had cooled. The sheriff stood hat in hand on the porch, 2 armed men behind him, and shame working visibly in the muscles of his jaw. Danner, don't make it uglier. It looks ugly already. Bell lowered his voice. Pike says bring the boy by sundown. Else foreclosure papers get filed at first light, and I jail you for resisting process. Danner glanced past him and saw 3 more riders on the road below. Not deputies. Pike's men. The space for choosing quietly had ended. That night came with hoofbeats. Danner had just banked the stove when the mare outside screamed. Then a shot. Then another. The window glass jumped. Down, he snapped. Everything after that moved fast. Eliza shoved Toby behind the iron cookstove. Danner blew the lamp dark. Smoke hit first, shoved under the door sharp with kerosene. The lower barn had caught. Horses thundered against their stalls. Danner grabbed the carbine. Back way. To the creek. No, Toby said. His face was white. The box. Eliza already had it tucked into her satchel. A bullet punched through the wall above the washstand. Splinters stung Danner's cheek. He fired once through the shutter and heard a man curse. Then he kicked open the rear door, and the cold came in hard enough to taste. Run. Across the yard. Through smoke. Past the trough. Sparks blew sideways in the black. The barn roof groaned. One horse got loose and tore through the firelight wild-eyed, mane full of embers. Short trail to the spruce cut. Toby stumbled. Danner hauled him up by the collar. Eliza ran beside them with her skirts gathered, breath harsh but even. Behind, men shouted. Bell's voice. Pike's foreman. The crack of brush under pursuit. At the creek, Danner turned upstream instead of down. Water slapped through his boots, numbing him to the shin. He knew every shelf of stone in that dark ravine, every twist where moonlight failed. He took them where men from town would ride bad and think worse. Halfway up the gulch, Toby gasped, Hale. Danner thought he had misheard. What? My name. The boy scrambled over a boulder, breath sawing. Toby Hale. The world narrowed to the sound of water and boots. Owen Hale had worked Danner's place 8 years earlier. Good hand. Good laugh. Dead under a rolled timber at Pike's mill before summer ended. Left behind a wife, Anna, and a baby no older than 2. Danner had gone down once after the burial and found the cabin empty. Pike's men said the widow had left the valley. He had believed them because believing cost less than prying. Your mother was Anna? Toby nodded without understanding what the question had done. A lantern beam swept the trees below. Pike's voice carried up, calm as Sunday. Boy, he cannot keep you. He is mountain trash with a dead ranch and a colder heart than you know. Danner stopped so abruptly Eliza nearly hit him. What is it? She whispered. He looked at Toby. Really looked. The shape of the brow. The stubborn set to the mouth Owen used to wear when a fence line offended him. And beneath the blood and soot, Anna's eyes. Something in Danner that had been locked since the day he buried his son gave way with a clean internal break. We keep climbing, he said. They reached the old or bridge near midnight, a swaying span of planks and cable over a gorge where spring water chewed white at the rocks. Danner got Toby halfway across before the first lantern flared behind them. Pike stepped out onto the near end, coat open now, gun in hand. The gorge threw his voice back at them in pieces. Enough. Put the box down. Eliza stood with one hand on the cable, hair blown loose around her face. You'd chase a wounded child into a ravine for bookkeeping? Pike smiled without warmth. For ownership, Mrs. Wynn. Paper is simply how ownership dresses itself. Danner kept Toby behind him. Come another step, and I drop a man into that water. Pike did come another step. Then another. The bridge shifted under all their weight. Bell, pale in the lantern glow, hovered on solid ground and said nothing. Pike lifted the pistol toward Toby. The boy or your pride, Cole. You don't get to save both. The next seconds broke jagged. Eliza moved first, not away but forward, swinging the lantern. Glass burst against the cable. Flame leaped. Pike fired. The shot went wide. Danner lunged. The bridge jerked sideways. Bell shouted. One of the rear support ropes snapped with a sound like a rifle crack. Planks dropped out from under their feet. Toby screamed once. Then the whole middle of the bridge fell. Cold black water hit like iron. Danner came up blind and fighting, one arm wrapped around Toby by pure instinct, the other clawing for anything that was not current. The gorge roared. Wood slammed past. Eliza surfaced downstream, coughing, caught for one heartbeat in moonlight before the water dragged her again. Danner kicked, shoved Toby toward a rock shelf, lost the tin box, found it again against his ribs because Eliza had tied the satchel strap around Toby's chest before the bridge gave way. He got the boy onto stone, then threw himself back into the current for Eliza. When he reached her, she was still conscious, one hand bloody where the cable had ripped it open. He dragged her to the shelf inch by inch, lungs burning, boots scraping slick rock, and for one hideous moment he thought the water would take all three and be done. It didn't. They crawled into a trapper's cave before dawn, shaking so hard their teeth knocked. Fire took time. dry moss, one match saved in Danner's tobacco tin, splintered pine from an old crate. When flame finally held, the cave filled with the smell of smoke and wet wool and living bodies pulled back from the edge. Toby slept first, laid out beneath Danner's coat and Eliza's shawl, cheeks waxy with exhaustion. Eliza sat with her injured hand in Danner's lap while he wrapped it clean. The skin across his knuckles was flayed. Her shoulder had bruised dark where rock found bone. Outside, water kept speaking to itself in the gorge. For a long while neither of them said what lived nearest the surface. Then Danner looked at the sleeping boy and said, "My son died because I chose wrong." Eliza did not interrupt. He took fever in lambing season. Lila begged me to fetch the doctor that evening. Storm was building, cows calving wild in the south meadow, half the herd near drift fence. I told myself dawn would do. Told myself men always have one more night to fix what's fraying. He wound the bandage once more around her palm, though it was already done. By dawn my boy was burning up, and by noon he was gone. I've been living in that one night ever since. The fire snapped softly. Eliza watched him with tired, steady eyes. My daughter's name was May. After she died, people said all the things people say when they can't carry your pain and still want credit for touching it. God's will. Better place. Time heals. I stopped inviting people close after that. Then I stopped inviting hope. Felt safer to call that wisdom. Danner let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh and not at all like one. Worked? No, she looked toward Toby. It only made the house quieter. He nodded. Some truths are so exact they do not need agreeing with. Toby stirred. His eyes opened to the firelight and the two faces leaning over him. For a second, he looked frightened, not of danger this time, but of waking into kindness and losing it. Did we die? He murmured. Not today, Eliza said. He watched them both, measuring. If someone keeps you, he asked in a very small voice, does that mean they love you? Danner felt the question strike deeper than any bullet could have. Eliza reached out with her good hand and smoothed the wet hair off Toby's forehead. No, honey, she said. Being fed keeps you alive. Being claimed teaches your heart where to go. Toby shut his eyes then, not from sleep, but because relief had finally gotten bigger than fear. Danner crossed to the saddlebag he had saved and took out a little carved horse, worn smooth from years in a pocket. His boy Ben had once slept with it curled in his fist. He laid it beside Toby's hand. When this is done, Danner said quietly, if you'll have it, you come home with me. Not as help. Not till I need you. Not on trial. Home. Toby's fingers closed around the carving without opening his eyes. All right. If this part of the story is moving you, you're exactly who we had in mind tonight. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep bringing you stories where goodness doesn't stay buried. Warmth returned by degrees. Safety did not. Once the sun climbed enough to gray the cave mouth, Eliza untied the satchel and checked the papers. Dry enough. Ledger intact. Burial copies legible. Toby pointed to one folded letter tucked into the back flap. Mama put that there. Said if I ever had to run, find Mr. Cole. Danner unfolded it with hands that had gone strangely careful. Mr. Cole, Owen said you were a man who stands when standing costs. If you are reading this, Cost has found us. If the boy lives, do not let them make him small. There are words a person can spend a lifetime being too late for. Danner read that one line twice and knew he had used up all the lateness he was ever going to allow himself. Judge Harrow's train would stop at Mercy Gap by noon for the water hearing. The main road would be watched. So Danner chose the high sheep trail that cut across shale and dropped in a town above the depot, a route fit for goats, grief, and mountain men who knew where stone would hold. They rode double and tight. Toby in front of Danner. Eliza on the mare despite her shoulder. Wind scraped the throat dry. Loose rock slid under hooves. Once, on the last descent, Toby looked back and saw riders below on the road like black pins moving through dust. He knows where we're going, the boy said. Let him, Danner answered. Mercy Gap was already gathered when they came in above the livery. Ranchers for the water case. Women from the church society. Mill hands with their noon pails. Bell near the depot platform, face drawn. Judge Harrow stood by the railcar steps with a silver watch in one hand and impatience on his brow. And Vernon Pike, of course, at the center of all of it. He saw Danner first and smiled as if this had become theater arranged for his convenience. There. I believe that saves the court time. Belle stepped forward with the warrant half raised. Toby flinched. Danner slid from the saddle and put himself between the boy and the crowd. "No," he said, loud enough for the platform, the watermen, and the women at the station window to hear. "What saves time is truth." He handed the ledger to Judge Harrow. Pike's color changed. Not much. Just enough. Harrow opened to the figures. Eliza came forward then, shoulders squared against pain, and laid the burial copies beside it. "These boys did not die as written," she said. "And this child was cut for carrying proof." Toby, voice thin but clear, named Eli, named Micah, named the hook, the chain, the south field where they buried children as if ground were cheaper than conscience. Murmurs started. Mrs. Greer covered her mouth with both hands. Old Hob muttered something that sounded like a prayer and a curse at once. "Belle's bad," I watered harder. Pike laughed, because men like him laugh when the room stops tilting their direction. "You trust a hysterical widow, a bankrupt rancher, and a stray boy over the county's records?" "No," Judge Harrow said. "I trust ledgers more than speeches, and this ledger is a hanging thing." Pike moved then. Fast. He grabbed Toby by the collar and hauled him sideways, pistol out and pressed under the boy's jaw before anyone finished inhaling. Women cried out. Belle froze like cowardice had finally reached bone. "Back," Pike said. The smoothness had cracked. Underneath it was rot and panic. "Horse." Danner did not rush him, did not shout. He watched the trembling in Pike's hand, the horse tied nearest the rail, the angle of sun in the animal's eye. Quiet men are often mistaken for empty ones. Danner let Pike make that mistake all the way to the end. "You won't get over the North Bridge with him," Danner said. "I don't need the bridge." "You do." Danner took one slow step left. "Your gelding won't cross the wash. Not after last winter when he broke through ice and near drowned. He favors the old flume road. Always has when he's scared." For the first time, Pike looked uncertain. Because Danner was right. He knew horses the way other men knew their own handwriting. Pike jerked Toby toward the mounting rail. Danner moved at the same instant, not for the gun, not for the man, but for the horse. He gave a low, sharp whistle through his teeth, the one stockman used to settle frightened mares. The gelding knew the sound. Its head came around. Pike's hand shifted, just enough. Toby dropped the way hurt children learn to drop. The shot fired wild. Danner's rope was already in the air. It went over Pike's gun arm and chest clean as sunrise. One hard pull, and Vernon Pike came off the rail sideways, hit the dirt, lost the pistol, and got dragged 3 yards before Danner set his heels and stopped him there in full view of the town he had owned that morning. Pike clawed for the gun. Belle, perhaps ashamed of every other second of his life, kicked it away. "Get him up," Judge Harrow said. "Alive?" Danner asked, not because he meant otherwise, but because some questions deserved hearing out loud. "Alive," Harrow said, "so he can watch it all leave him." And it did. The court seized Pike's books. Belle named the payments because once one frightened man speaks, others often discover their own tongues. Mrs. Coyle was taken from St. Agnes before sundown. The county board shut the place by week's end. 2 more boys were found in the upper logging camp, underfed and wearing work collars too big for their necks. Pike's mortgages were audited and 3 proved fraudulent before the month was out, Danner's among them. The mill went to receivership. The south field behind St. Agnes was dug before the first frost. Justice, when it finally came, was not loud. It was thorough. People in Mercy Gap changed slowly, as decent people sometimes do after learning how long they have lived beside evil and called it inconvenience. Mrs. Greer sent over 2 jars of peach preserves without a note. Old Hob fixed Danner's gate. Belle resigned before winter, and nobody asked him to stay. Children began using the St. Agnes yard for games once Eliza had the windows opened and the rooms scrubbed. She said no child ought to hear only sorrow in a place if laughter could be taught there too. Toby healed crooked at first, then strong. He slept the first month with the carved horse under his pillow and woke once or twice from dreams with Danner's name caught in his throat. Danner always answered. That mattered more than speeches. As for Eliza, she started coming up the mountain on purpose after the wounds were gone. First with school slates for Toby, then with seed packets, then with no excuse at all. The day she laughed in Danner's kitchen and did not seem surprised by the sound, something in that house finally forgave itself. By spring, Judge Harrow returned with papers naming Toby Hale under Danner Cole's guardianship, witnessed by Eliza Wynn in a hand steadier than the one she had carried all winter. Danner signed like a man laying down a rifle after a long road. Toby signed slower, tongue caught at the corner of his mouth in concentration, then stared at the page as if it might disappear. It didn't. Years later, folks would still say the mountain ranch changed after that boy came bleeding out of the pines. But they got it backward. The truth was the ranch had waited all along for someone small enough, wounded enough, and brave enough to call forth the man Danner had nearly buried with his dead. By late summer the porch had fresh paint, the pasture grass stood knee-high, and Toby had grown bold enough to whistle badly at chickens while Eliza corrected his sums at the table. One evening Danner came in from the north fence and found the two of them framed in lamplight, her hand resting on the back of Toby's chair, the boy arguing that 8 times 7 ought to be negotiable if a person was otherwise honest. Danner leaned in the doorway listening to them bicker and smiled before either of them looked up. Strange thing about a home. Sometimes it is built the first time somebody stays and finished the first time they believe they can. At dusk the three of them stood in the pasture while the horses lowered their heads to the new grass, and the last light rested on the cabin windows like it had finally found the right house. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf woman sent to a frozen cattle spread because her brothers were ashamed of her, and the half-blind rancher who saw her courage long before anyone else did.